Think I am live now. Not entirely sure. Made this mistake first time. Double check. All right. So we're good. We're good. All right. Cool. So this is the CARES Act amendment. Okay. This became law on June 5, 2020. This is the congress.gov website. Law there, 6.5. So the big deal with this is that they've changed the fact that you no longer need to keep the same amount of employees that you started with in the first quarter of 2020. Okay, so that's going to change the math on how this works, and we're going to go through that today. The other thing that's changed, which is not really a big deal, but it is that they changed the repayment of the loan to a minimum of 5 years. And then, of course, you and the bank between yourselves can discuss, how many years the loan can be repaid. You can negotiate for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, but there's a minimum of 5 years that the loan has to be repaid for. So that can be a good thing. But of course, the idea is for these loans to be forgiven, right? You don't want to have to pay this money back. So we'll talk a little bit about the forgiveness and how that's been modified. The coverage period has also been changed. So instead of being only the 24 weeks, which is roughly 6 months, it's now the full year. So you now have until December 31, 2020, which doesn't change a whole lot because you can apply for PPP today, which is June, right? So 6 months from today will be December 31st, 2020. So that hasn't really changed much at all. But what is important here is that you no longer have to have the same number of employees. Okay, that's a big deal. So if you started off with 5 employees in the first quarter of 2020, then you are able to receive the PPP loan for those same 5 employees, even though you don't have those same 5 employees in second, third, and fourth quarter of 2020. The other thing that's really important to mention here is that they have this term here, says in good faith. Okay. And so typically in good faith means that we're going to use the honor code here. So no one's really going to be looking at exactly what is going on with these employees as far as the law says. Now, I don't know how that's going to be administered as far as the banks go, but we'll just have to wait and find out. Want to reiterate exactly what that means again. So if you have 5 employees in first quarter of 2020, you can apply for the PPP for those 5 employees, even though you no longer have those 5 employees in the second, third, and fourth quarter of 2020. Okay. Now, again, they're saying in good faith. Okay. Now, they're saying that in order to have this loan forgiven, you will have to document an inability to rehire individuals who were your employees in the first quarter of 2020. What does that documentation mean? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, and we won't know until we see again how this is going to be administered by the banks. It is my opinion that the banks are going to try to get back as much of this money as possible. I don't think they're just going to willy-nilly forgive all of the loans. I don't see that happening. So I think they're going to do their best to get back as much of this money as possible. So when it comes to documentation, as far as forgiveness, again, we don't know until we get there. But the law says that you have to document an inability to rehire the individuals who are employees in the first quarter of 2020. Okay. You have to also document an inability to hire similarly qualified employees on or before December 31st, 2020. So that means that if you have 5 employees in the first quarter of 2020 and you no longer have those employees for the rest of the year, you have to document that you were unable to hire them. I can't imagine what that's going to mean. Maybe it's an email, you know, like, hey, please come back to work. No one comes back to work. Maybe it is an employment ad where you put out an ad for employees and you don't get any qualified employees to respond to the ad. Not sure. The other thing that you'll be asked to document in order to have this loan forgiven is the inability to return to the same level of business activity as such business was operating at or before first quarter of 2020 and specifically February 15th of 2020 due to compliance with requirements established or guidance by the CDC. Okay, now I want to take you very quickly to the NAICS code page. Okay, we talked about this in the previous video. This is the these are the business codes that specify what type of business you're in. Okay, so depending on the business that you're in, depends on whether or not your business has been affected by the CDC regulations. I can imagine that if you're a customer-facing business, then you're probably going to be affected by the CDC in some form or another. If you are a business that is already mostly remote, then I cannot imagine that you're going to be affected by CDC regulations, right? So again, I don't know how strict the banks are going to be in this, but this is ammunition that they have to shoot back and say, no, this loan is not going to be forgiven because your business based on your NAICS code was not affected by the CDC regulations. Okay. So anyway, that's that. And again, exactly what the documentation is going to be, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. All right. Limitation on forgiveness has also changed. In order to receive loan forgiveness, 60% of the loan amount has been used for payroll. The other 40% can be used for interest. I'm sorry, not interest, but mortgage, rent, or utilities. Okay. The other thing that's important here is that they have changed the covered date. So if you received a PPP loan already, you can elect for the covered date to end 8 weeks after you actually received the loan. Once that covered date has been reached, at that point you will then need to request forgiveness. So if you received a PPP loan, let's say on March 1st, then you'll have until actually, roughly today to start requesting loan forgiveness. Now, once you request loan forgiveness, how long the bank has to deny or approve, as far as I know, has yet to be seen. So the other thing that's important to mention here is that you have roughly 10 months to have this thing forgiven. Does that mean the banks will literally wait until the end of 10 months to deny or approve? I don't know. If they do, what that means is at the end of that 10 months, which again, if you receive your loan on March 1st, the covered period ends June 1st, and then you have 10 months from June 1st to actual forgiveness. So we're talking about, roughly April of next year, March of next year, to actually have the loan forgiven. If it's not forgiven at that point, you'll have to start paying that money back. So we're talking about getting a loan in March and having to start paying it back next year in March or April. The other thing that's important here is this Section 4, delay of payment of employer payroll taxes. This one I don't quite understand, honestly. Now, the original CARES Act says that in order for the loan to be forgiven, you must be current on all your taxes. That is going to include payroll, unemployment, excise, income. They said taxes. So I imagine that means every tax that you're liable for will need to be paid and current, or at least have some sort of payment arrangement in place before the loan can be forgiven. And I can imagine that something like this is going to, again, go through the banks where you say, hey, bank, I want to have my loan forgiven. the bank then reaches out to the government, and the government says, oh, well, they're not current on their taxes. The bank comes back and says, hey, you're not current on your taxes, therefore we're not going to forgive this loan. Now, remember, banks' job, their whole thing, right, is to uh, give out loans and then get that money back, right? That's their business. I can't imagine that they're going to say, "Oh, no worries, let's just forgive everything and whatever," right? I don't think that's the case. I think the banks are going to work hard on trying to get this money back, no different than banks do with student loans, right? Student loans are also guaranteed by the government, and banks still work really hard to try to get that money back from persons who have received student loans. I can't imagine that this is going to work any different. Um, the other thing that's important to mention here, and that's the end of it, it's pretty short, um, is, what was it? Once we talked about that, talked about the payment. Okay, I think that's it. All right, so let's just go back and make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did though. So um, you no longer have to keep the same number of employees that you had in the first quarter of 2020. That is huge, and we'll go over the math on that here in just a second. Also, too, they changed the repayment period to 5 years, so that's going to make it a lot easier to make these payments. And the cover period is also going for 8 weeks, and then you have another 10 months after that. All right, so good enough. So now let's look at some numbers. All right, so I'm basing these numbers on a 40,000 a year employee. Okay, so if you are $40,000 a year, oh, that's what I meant to bring up. Okay, so currently the banks have been asking for both 2019 and 2020 payroll returns, okay, in order to qualify you for the PPP loan, okay? Now, I don't know if that's going to continue um, um, into the latter part of the year, right? So when we get into second, third, fourth quarter, I don't know if they're going to keep requiring 2019 payroll. For now, they are though. Okay, so what that means is that in 2019, of course, you had to have payroll. All right, so we're going to assume that you paid an employee or employees $40,000 a year for 2019. Okay, so that comes out to $10,000 a quarter. Okay, and remember the PPP is for 2.5 months worth of salary. So if it's $10,000 a quarter, that comes out to $3,000 a month. Multiply that times 2.5, you have an $8,000 loan to cover payroll for 2.5 months. Okay, now keep in mind that this $8,000 in payroll also will have payroll tax associated with it. Okay, now in order to get to this $8,000, the only way to get to 8,000 is that you have to have 40,000 for the year. If you have 40,000 for the year, then you have to have payroll tax for the year. Okay, so we're talking about right now. Let me get rid of these numbers. We're talking about getting a loan for $8,000. Okay, but you're going to have to spend 6,000 in payroll tax. So you're only really getting about $2,000 of free money. Not anything to cough at, but it's important to understand that um, uh, it's not fully your money, right? You have to pay taxes on it. Now, the other thing to look at here is that only 60% of the loan has to go um, towards payroll. So let's quickly look and see what 60% is of that $8,000 loan. That's $5,000. Okay, so if we do the payroll taxes on 5,000, we're looking at $765. So we come back again, we look at our loan minus our tax. Well, now we're seeing basically almost $8,000 of free money. Okay, now The other thing that's important to mention here is that you must use the rest of this for rent or utilities. Now, personally, I don't have $3,000 rent and utilities that I can come up with in the course of 2.5 months. Um, and the cover period is what, 8 weeks, right? So I think it's going to be hard for some people to only use 60% of the money for payroll if you have to use the other 40% for rent or utilities. If you can, great. If not, then you may run into some issues about having that portion of the loan forgiven. The other thing that has yet to be seen is exactly, again, how is this going to be administered? So if I say to you, okay, I used $3,000 for rent and utilities, is that just something that's going to be on a tax return? Or are they going to request receipts? I mean, how's that going to work, right? If I say that I spent $3,000 on utilities, do they want to see my light bill, my phone bill, or is me simply filing a tax return showing $3,000 of rent and utilities going to be enough? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. We'll have to wait and see. But let's get to the really fun stuff here, okay? Because this is what this amendment is going to mean. Okay, so let's say that the first quarter of 2020, you had 5 employees. Okay. All right. Now, if you had 5 employees in the first quarter of 2020, okay, then you're going to have to pay the payroll tax for those 5 employees. Okay. So that's going to come out to $76.50. Okay. Now, in the second quarter of 2020, you don't have to have those same 5 employees. So you still qualify for a loan of $41,000. Okay, so you'll get a loan of $41,000 and you'll have to pay $76.50 in payroll tax for the first quarter of 2020. So you still have $34,000 left over. Okay, now in the second, third, and fourth quarter for the second quarter of 2020, you have to use 60% of your loan proceeds for payroll. Okay, so keep in mind this $76.50, that's first quarter payroll tax. Okay, so the second quarter payroll tax, you only have to use 60%. Okay, so this is your payroll tax for the second quarter of 2020. All right. So now what we're going to look at is how much you have left over after you pay first and second quarter payroll tax. And there we go. So you still have 30,000 left over. Now the other roughly 16,000? Let's see. Yeah. So the other 16,000, again, in order for it to be forgiven, has to be spent on rent and or utilities. Again, if you're someone that can come up with $16,000 worth of rent and utilities, great. If not, then you may have a hard time getting this portion of the loan forgiven. So the easiest thing to do, of course, is to use as much of the loan as possible for payroll. But again, the more you use for payroll, the more payroll tax you're going to pay. So let's just assume, okay, that you're going to use, 90% for payroll, right? So if we use 90% for payroll, then we're talking about the loan amount minus first quarter payroll taxes minus second quarter payroll taxes. You still have roughly $28,000 free and clear, because at that point you'll only have to come up with, what is that, like $4,000 in rent and utilities, which isn't that difficult to do. So again, this is based on 5 employees for first quarter of 2020 and saying that you no longer have those employees for second, third, and fourth quarter of 2020. Now, they are asking for documentation showing that you weren't able to rehire those individuals and that you weren't able to replace those individuals. And there's also a second option here that talks about where to go, not having your business um, back to the level. I think it's exactly what it says. Let me make sure. Looking at the right thing. There you go. Okay, here we go. I keep passing over it. To document an inability to return to the same level of business activity as such business was operating at or before February 15, 2020. Again, what they're going to use to determine that, I don't know. It seems very vague. And again, my concern is that banks are going to go pretty hard about trying to get back this money. I really don't think that they're just going to, la-di-da, forgive everyone's loan, because that's what they're in the business of doing, is giving out loans and then getting the money back. They hire people, they hire bill collectors, they hire collections agents and all this kind of stuff to get back as much of their money as they possibly can. And I think that's going to continue. While the money is available and while forgiveness is available, I do say be cautious. Personally, I have said over and over again that unemployment is a better deal. Every state is going to be different. And that's another thing that I wanted to mention here. So when we're looking at these payroll tax numbers that you see here, okay, this is just the federal, okay? This is not even including federal unemployment, which is like $40. I didn't include it because $40 is like nothing, right? But each state is going to have their own set of amounts to be added to this, right? So, for instance, if you're in the state of Texas, your state unemployment is going to be roughly 250 for the quarter, not to exceed 575. So, again, I don't know who you are and where you are, but if we were to simply add, some money here, and just to be very conservative about this, we'll put this at 600 actually. There you go. So what we're talking about then is first quarter 2020 payroll tax being something in the neighborhood of $8,000. All right, and then we'll add 600 to this one. Again, I'm doing this just to be very conservative. This is not including income tax either, right? Because of course your payroll is going to go to your personal tax return. You'll have to pay income tax on that. So we're not even talking about that, okay? Um, we're not talking about state income taxes, none of that stuff. So we're still talking about roughly 27,000 free and clear, um, based on, again, simply paying yourself the total, yeah, almost total of the loan. Yeah, 26,000 free and clear, simply because of this amendment. So this is a great benefit to everyone. So I hope this clears some things up for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Again, what's going to be required so far, it's going to be your 2019 payroll returns. If you haven't filed that yet, you're still eligible to file that. Your 2020 first quarter and 2020 second quarter will not be due until July. Okay. Another thing that I want to throw in here, I did a video on this a while back, and I have not received any update on it yet. I just want to throw this in here, just so we can kind of see what's going on. This is the um, COVID-19 unemployment. I'm sorry, not unemployment. Payroll tax advance payment refund. Okay. Now, everyone that I've talked to so far says that this is primarily going to be for second quarter, even though in the instructions they do allow for first quarter payroll to be included in this. Okay. So there is still an opportunity to not have to even pay payroll tax at all. All right. Again, I haven't seen anything back from this. I have not heard anything back from this. So I can't say for sure that you won't have to pay payroll tax, but this is available. Okay. From me to you, I'll holler.